Irashaimase. Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Gun and Frontier, a sci-fi western themed shoot 'em up. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Taito, Gun and Frontier, or Gun Frontier as it was known as in Japan, released to arcades in 1990. Over the years, it would see release on the Sega Saturn as parts of the compilation on the Taito Legends 2, as well as most recently the Egret 2 Mini. So fast forward to today, and it's now available as part of the Arcade Archive collection for the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 4. And it's definitely an interesting title to have a look at, but overall I feel there are much stronger titles from Taito, so this one does have some interesting elements to it, but overall I think for most even shoot 'em up fans it's probably a safe pass, especially if you have one of those other two compilations this is included on. So with that said, diving into the game itself, throwing some credits into it, we're taken to this relatively nice start screen. This game does support 2-player simultaneous, so that's the way that we'll be showing the game off. And that nice title screen there, you'll notice that there was some really interesting mech design with the way that our ships are. So this game is loosely like a sci-fi western theme, and one of the biggest elements of that is in the mech design. So we're flying a plane that basically looks like a revolver with wings, and a lot of the enemy ships are also like that. So as far as the systems are concerned, this one is your relatively basic vertical scrolling shoot 'em up. We have a shot which we can power up throughout the course of the game by collecting these dimes that show up when you defeat certain enemies, and there's also bombs as well, and we'll get to using those here shortly. The key thing to note is the bombs are powered up, or rather even like you can like get more bombs by collecting these gold bars that drop when you defeat ground enemies only, and that's one important distinction to note, because there will be sections where there are no ground enemies, so you can't power up your bomb, which is somewhat frustrating. We are playing this game in co-op mode today, so that's one important distinction that needs to be made with that as well. So the game employs checkpoint systems if you're playing it solo. However, if you're playing it in 2-player, then the checkpoints are disabled and, well, up until the very end, and you'll be playing it in you'll be able to continue where you die. With one, it's a very notable exception, and it's an exception that I feel makes the checkpoint system actually manageable in this title, and that's if you die on a boss, regardless of if you're playing in 2-player or single-player, you will continue on that boss as long as you have lives. So let's talk a little bit about like bosses as is. So the first boss has some really awesome mech design as well as awesome explosions, and that mech design is that it's basically a giant revolver mounted to a tank, and so that this enemy here is another great example of the mech design. It's like two Winchesters glued together with another gun in the middle. The mech design on this game is one of my favorite elements of it, so you're going to hear me talking about it a fair bit throughout the course of this video, as I feel it's like one of the strongest elements that this game happens to have. But other than that, so as I was noting, the gold pickups are how we power up our bombs, and there are a lot of parts of the gameplay where we have sections like this where admittedly these are just transports that we're taking out, but there are no ground enemies in sight. So if we had used our bombs and we're trying to power them back up, it's not possible. When you lose a life and continue, whether it's from the checkpoint or from where you died in the multiplayer version of the game, you do not. You do recover a few of the little bombs that you get, and so you'll have a weaker bomb overall. But you can get a full-powered bomb, so a bomb max, by collecting 25 bars of gold. You'll see that I'm just about there on the one-player screen. When that happens, you see Bomber Max, and there's that red icon there at the top. The bomb itself acts as a napalm, and depending on the direction you're pressing your control stick when you fire it, there'll be some elements of how it moves. So it's possible to go and fire it backwards, but if you fire it from a neutral position, it will fire forward, and then if you move the control stick one way or another, you can actually influence the direction that the bomb itself bends. In certain situations with a lot of enemies, that could prove useful, but overall you're just going to want to blow up as much of the screen as possible. So an example of that is if I launch it now and then curve it right, it can cover a little bit more space to the right at the top, but it doesn't influence it significantly, but still it is kind of neat that you can just affect that element just a wee bit. So overall, the gameplay starts to ramp up relatively quickly, where you've got a lot of enemies showing up on the screen, firing a lot of the lasers at you. And an important thing to note is later in the game, sometimes I feel like the checkpoints are. So they're actually quite numerous, and that's one of the things that makes the checkpoint system pretty good in this title. However, later in the game, there will be checkpoints where you're just dropped in basically this crazy firefight, and if I was putting quarters into the machine, then I would have spent several probably a good $10 getting past one checkpoint, just trying to figure out the best way to manage some of the difficulty that the enemies were throwing at me. Because for two reasons. The first reason is that at that particular checkpoint, there weren't many gold bars on the ground, so even if I were trying to stockpile gold to have more powerful bombs, it wasn't possible, and then it was just an extremely difficult section of the game. So there you have it. That's Gun Frontier served up for your enjoyment. So overall, a relatively straightforward and basic vertical scrolling shoot 'em up with some neat theming and some great mech design, also some pretty neat explosions. But the minus flavors, so one thing I haven't talked about to this point, but you might have noticed, is the plane itself doesn't move, or our fighter, the Desperado as it's called, doesn't move particularly fast at all. It's relatively slow fighter, and with all that is thrown at us and that we need to dodge around, sometimes that's an advantage, but at other times it feels quite frustrating. To liken it to something like, say, Gradius, for example, it'd be wonderful if there was a speed power-up or something where we could power up our, rather increase our speed one step, kind of along the same lines, just enough that we can move faster, but still maintain a fair bit of control over the ship itself. Then I have had some issues with the color choices, and this was more playing it in handheld mode on the Switch, a little less so when you're playing it on a bigger screen, but it can still be a concern. The colors on some shots and missiles for the enemies is actually kind of poorly chosen. So there'll be situations where enemy shots will blend in with the background, and just making it very difficult to see what's coming your way, and that also resulted in a lot of deaths, and specifically in that one checkpoint I was talking about that I was stuck on for a very substantial amount of time. So there we kind of see the game resetting back to a checkpoint, and it was very close to where we died, so that's a good example of how the checkpoint system is actually pretty fair in this game, save for some poor checkpoint placement. And like that's my third minus flavor. Is just sometimes, even though the checkpoint system is pretty good in this game, every once in a while some of the checkpoints are poorly placed. You would appreciate it if they were maybe in an area to give you a lead up to a heavier firefight area, or perhaps a chance to actually build up the firepower of your fighter before things got super heavy on the whole combat side of things. But as far as the plus flavors, I love the art on the game, particularly the backgrounds. You have a lot of effects going on throughout the course of the gameplay. Like in the stage that comes after this one, you're flying over a wheat field, and that wheat field has wind blowing through the field. Just a light, minor effect, but it's something that I really appreciate being there. And then also the theme itself, I consider to be like one of the biggest draws of this particular title. Here's a picture of the instruction card. If I would have seen this in arcade, it would have been one of those things where I'd be like, yeah, I totally want to go and like see play that. That looks awesome. The game definitely captures that to a degree, but not quite as awesome as what's pictured here. So there you have it. That's Gun and Frontier. I have no idea why they added the "and" for the English release. Served for your enjoyment. One that overall I feel is a safe pass for all but the most like a hardcore of Taito and Arcade Archive fans. Alright, that'll just about wrap it up for this week's Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I hope you yourself have a wonderful week, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Go up, please.